Stop. Before you put those pruning shears away for winter, I need to show you something that's going to change everything you thought you knew about fruit trees. There's a specific window happening right now in January, and if you miss it, you're literally leaving hundreds of pounds of fruit on the table. I'm talking about the difference between a handful of apples and crates full of them. And no, this isn't about some expensive fertilizer or fancy equipment. This is about 7 trees that are practically begging to be pruned this month, and I'm going to show you exactly why January is their magic moment. Welcome to Timeless Gardens, where we help you grow more for less. If you're new here, you've just stepped into a community of gardeners who believe that a thriving garden doesn't require a trust fund, just the right knowledge at the right time. And if you're back again, welcome home. You know we don't do fluff here, just real techniques that actually work in real gardens. Now, before we dive into these 7 fruit trees, do me a favor. See that subscribe button? Tap it right now, because I release a new budget-friendly gardening strategy every single week, and honestly, I don't want you to miss the February video that's going to blow this one out of the water. Also, hit that like button if you're excited to triple your harvest without tripling your spending. It genuinely helps more gardeners discover these tips. Alright, let's get into it. Here's what most gardeners get wrong about January pruning. They think it's just about maintenance, keeping things tidy, maybe preventing disease. And sure, that's part of it. But what if I told you that for certain fruit trees, January pruning is actually the secret switch that tells the tree to go absolutely crazy with fruit production come summer? The science behind this is fascinating. When you prune during dormancy, which for most fruit trees is happening right now in January, you're redirecting the tree's energy. Think of it like this: your tree has a certain amount of fuel in its tank. If that fuel is being split between 100 branches, each branch gets a tiny sip. But if you strategically remove the right branches in January, suddenly that same fuel is concentrated into fewer, stronger branches, and those branches explode with fruit. Today, I'm walking you through 7 specific fruit trees that respond to January pruning like they've been given a superpower. And I'm not just telling you to prune them. I'm showing you why January matters, what to cut, what to keep, and the exact reason each cut is going to multiply your harvest. Tree number 1. Let's start with the apple tree, but not in the way you've heard before. Everyone knows apples need pruning. What they don't tell you is that January is when apple trees are in their deepest sleep, and that's when they can handle the most aggressive reshaping without going into shock. Here's the insider move: apples fruit on what's called spurs, these little stubby branches that look almost useless. Most people accidentally cut them off because they don't look like much. Big mistake. In January, your job is to remove all the vertical shoots, the ones shooting straight up like they're trying to escape the tree. These are called water sprouts, and they're energy thieves. They produce zero fruit but consume tons of resources. Cut those out completely, flush to the branch. Then look for any branches crossing over each other. They're basically fighting for sunlight, and neither will produce well. Choose the stronger one, remove the weaker one. What you're left with is an open center that lets sunlight flood into the middle of the tree. More sun equals more fruit, it's that simple. But here's the January advantage: because the tree is dormant, it won't respond to these cuts by sending out a bunch of panicked new growth like it would in spring. Instead, it'll wake up in March, see the new structure you've created, and focus all its energy on those fruit spurs. That's how you go from a few dozen apples to a few hundred. Tree number 2. Next up, pear trees, and this one surprises people. Pears are the patient tree in your garden. They take their time, and if you prune them wrong, they'll punish you by taking even longer to fruit. But prune them right in January? They'll reward you like you wouldn't believe. Pears have this quirk where they're prone to something called fire blight, especially if you prune during the growing season. January pruning completely sidesteps this risk because the bacteria that causes fire blight is dormant in winter. So right away, you're protecting your tree while setting it up for success. The technique here is about angles. Pears fruit best on branches that are closer to horizontal rather than vertical. Vertical branches grow fast but produce less fruit. So in January, identify any branches that are shooting upward at sharp angles. Either remove them entirely or, if they're young enough, you can actually use weights or ties to gently bend them more horizontal. I know that sounds strange, but professional orchardists do this all the time. Also, thin out the center of your pear tree. Pears need airflow to prevent disease, and they need sunlight to sweeten the fruit. A crowded pear tree gives you hard, bland pears. An open, well-pruned pear tree gives you those buttery, melt-in-your-mouth pears that cost a fortune at the farmer's market. January is when you make that choice for next summer. Quick pause. If you're finding this valuable, drop a comment right now and tell me which of these trees you have in your garden. I read every single comment, and honestly, your questions help me create better videos for this community. Also, if you haven't liked this video yet, go ahead and smash that like button. It tells YouTube to share this with more gardeners who need it. Tree number 3. Now let's talk about plum trees, and this is where January pruning becomes almost magical. Plums are vigorous growers. Leave them alone and they'll turn into a tangled jungle that produces tiny, sparse fruit. But give them a January haircut? You'll be drowning in plums by August. The secret with plums is something called renovation pruning. Plums can handle heavy pruning better than almost any other fruit tree, but only when they're dormant. In January, you can remove up to 1/3 of the tree's total growth, focusing on the oldest wood. Old branches produce less fruit and are more prone to disease. Look for branches that are darker, rougher bark compared to the smoother, younger branches. Cut those old branches back to a younger side shoot. This forces the tree to put energy into the vibrant, productive wood. Also, plums tend to form these dense clusters of branches. Thin them out so each remaining branch has space to breathe. Here's what happens. Come spring, your plum tree wakes up, realizes it has less mass to support, and goes into overdrive on fruit production. Plus, bigger plums. When a tree isn't overcrowded, each fruit gets more nutrients, more sun, and you end up with those giant, juicy plums instead of the hard little marbles. Tree number 4. Peach trees are up next, and if you've ever grown peaches, you know they're both incredibly rewarding and incredibly frustrating. They fruit heavily one year, then barely at all the next. January pruning is how you break that cycle. Peaches fruit on last year's growth, which means the branches that grew last summer will be the ones producing fruit this summer. Your January job is to identify those branches and protect them while removing everything else that's just taking up space. Here's the technique. Peaches respond beautifully to what's called an open vase shape. You want 3 to 5 main scaffold branches radiating out from the center with an open middle. Remove any branches growing toward the center, any branches that are dead or damaged, and here's the key thing, thin out some of those new shoots from last year. I know it feels counterintuitive to remove the fruit-bearing wood, but here's why it works. If you leave every single shoot, you'll get a ton of tiny peaches that never ripen properly. If you thin them out in January, removing about half of those shoots, the remaining ones produce fewer but much larger, sweeter peaches. Commercial orchards do this religiously because they know that buyers want quality over quantity. Tree number 5. Cherry trees, both sweet and sour varieties, have their own January pruning personality. Cherries are light sensitive, meaning they need direct sunlight to produce and ripen fruit. A shaded cherry is a sad cherry. The January strategy here is vertical versus horizontal, similar to pears. Cherries naturally want to grow tall and narrow. That's great for saving space but terrible for harvesting and fruit production. In January, while the tree is dormant, prune to encourage horizontal spread. Remove any branches growing straight up or straight down. Keep branches that are growing outward at roughly 45 to 60 degree angles. These are your fruit factories. Also, cherries are prone to a disease called silver leaf that enters through pruning cuts, but only during wet weather. January is typically drier, and the cold temperatures keep that fungus inactive. One more cherry-specific tip: thin out the fruiting spurs. Cherries develop these tight clusters of spurs along the branches, and if you leave them all, they overcrowd and produce poorly. In January, go through and thin out about 1/3 of the oldest, most crowded spurs. The remaining spurs will produce larger, healthier cherries. Tree number 6. Fig trees might surprise you on this list because a lot of people think figs don't need pruning. Wrong. Figs benefit massively from January pruning, but the approach is completely different from other fruit trees. Figs produce fruit in 2 possible waves. The first crop comes on last year's wood, the second crop comes on new growth. Most home gardeners only get one decent crop. With January pruning, you can maximize both. Here's what to do: remove any branches that fruited heavily last year and are now looking tired and droopy. Cut them back to a strong side shoot. This rejuvenates the tree and stimulates fresh growth for that second crop. Also, figs tend to sucker heavily from the base. These suckers steal energy from fruit production. In January, cut them away cleanly at ground level. The other benefit of January fig pruning is shaping. Figs can grow into awkward, sprawling shapes that make harvesting difficult. By pruning in dormancy, you can create a more manageable, open structure. And because figs are tough and resilient, they bounce back from January pruning with explosive summer growth. Tree number 7. The final tree is one that people forget about: the apricot. Apricots are underrated and underplanted, probably because they can be finicky. But January pruning transforms them from temperamental to tremendously productive. Apricots, like peaches, fruit on last year's growth. They also have a tendency to overbear, meaning they'll set so much fruit that the branches literally break under the weight. January pruning prevents this disaster. Remove about 1/3 of last year's growth, focusing on the thinnest, weakest shoots. Keep the thickest, healthiest shoots because those can support heavy fruit loads. Also, apricots benefit from an open center structure just like peaches. Remove any branches crossing through the middle of the tree. The January timing is critical for apricots because they bloom very early, sometimes as early as late February depending on your climate. If you wait until February or March to prune, you risk cutting off flower buds. January gives you that perfect window to shape the tree before it wakes up. So there you have it. 7 fruit trees, 7 January pruning strategies, and the potential to triple your harvest without spending an extra penny on fertilizers or treatments. This is the kind of knowledge that separates a garden that just exists from a garden that truly produces. Now here's my challenge to you. Pick one of these trees, even if you're nervous about pruning, and try it this January. Start small, start careful, but start. Because every single one of these techniques comes from real orchards producing real harvests, and they'll work in your garden too. If you found this helpful, make sure you're subscribed because next month I'm revealing the 3 vegetables you should be planting right now in February for a summer harvest that'll make your neighbors think you've got a secret. And I want you there for that one. Drop a comment telling me your biggest pruning fear or your biggest pruning success story. I love hearing from you. And if you know someone who's got fruit trees and wants a bigger harvest, share this video with them. Let's grow more together. I'll see you in the next one.